Welcome to a Legalbytes presentation of the Karen Reed murder trial. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel we make sense of the law one bite at a time. If you want more on the background of the Karen Reed case, check out our video on it linked in the description below. But otherwise, you be the jury. Did Karen Reed murder her Boston PD boyfriend John O'Keefe, or is she being framed by local police who Reed says are actually responsible for O'Keefe's death? Tell us what you think. But in the process, the one rule is don't be a dingus. Remember, everyone comes from their own perspective and opinion, and everyone comes to conclusions at their own pace. Agree or disagree, but always respectfully. Okay, let's get into it. All right, you guys, we have the afternoon session now. Just started just a few minutes ago. We are going to go at 1.25x speed because it is another Lally direct examination. If you hear any meows, that is because we have been visited once again by Fitzy, my parents' cat. So he is our Fur Bites stand-in for today, just like yesterday. So he may pop up into the screen until he starts giving me love bites again, in which case I will send him a little bit further away. I'm only half kidding. Anyhow, so yes, if you do hear that, you're not going crazy and it's not coming from the courtroom. It is coming from this area right here. So as always, we will get questions in the chat. I apologize if there are any from previous that I missed while you guys were waiting for the stream. I'm going to do a quick scan and see if there's any that I have missed. Oh, there is one. Okay, there's at least one. I won't bring it on the screen just because it's a bit further back. I've got to then go and find it. But this is from John Smith. Legalbytes. Sorry if I missed you answering this morning's session. But why do lawyers object to form of questions? Often when jury has already heard it, the lawyer will just rephrase it and still get the answer. That is a good point, because sometimes you're actually almost helping them by objecting as to the form if you know that they're going to do it. But sometimes it does trip up the other side, that it sort of forces them to kind of go back and be like, what was the question that I was asking in the first place? You know, it can actually interrupt the flow of the questioning as well. So there are a number of reasons, both strategic and like more centrally important to the process as to why. You know, it can also be that someone is starting to veer towards an improper form in a lot of their questions, and you want to sort of correct that behavior by getting them to ask questions in a way that is supposed to be proper for it. So, you know, leading questions. If Lally starts leading a lot on something, he's got a couple questions that maybe you start to see a trend where he's starting to do that. Then that is something that, you know, warrants some correction to kind of like not quite body check, but you know what I mean? You're just kind of nudging him like, hey, you've got to do this properly. You know, sometimes there are also reasons to do it like that. Okay, I think that's the only one that I see there. We are going to go ahead and jump right on in. We have a brand new witness. This is our 61st witness. 61st witness, and we have not yet heard from the medical examiner. So I've already pinned the chat showing this is the direct exam of Tess Char. This is another BODE technology analyst. So this is who we've got next. She's going to tell us a little bit more. She's probably going to tell us about the mitochondrial what's it called? Testing of that hair sample. So maybe we'll find out that this is in fact John O'Keefe's hair through her. Otherwise, what's the point in her testifying if nothing came of it? Unless that is ultimately the testimony. Okay. All right. Let's get to it. And also, as you are watching, if you are enjoying this, please do like the stream. It really does help us to get this out there. I will give more reminders as we go along, but awesome. Okay, let's get going.
Step right up here.
Why the courtroom, please?
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the honesty of the court and jury in the case now here into the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You can take the stand.
Go right ahead, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Sure. My name is Tess Chart, C-H-A-R-T.
And Ms. Chart, what do you do for work?
I'm a forensic DNA analyst at BODE Technology.
And where is BODE Technology located?
It's in Lorton, Virginia.
And I'll ask you some questions, just a little bit about your educational background, starting with your undergraduate work. Where did you go to school, and what, if any, degree did you receive in relation to your undergraduate?
Sure. I have my bachelor's in science in molecular biology from Millersville University in Pennsylvania. And then I have my master's of science in forensic science from Towson University in Maryland.
All right, so Ms. Chad, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up really loud, okay? Thank you.
Ms. Chart, if it's at all helpful, that microphone is adjustable. You can move it anywhere. Now, with reference to your master's in forensic science, when about was that you received?
So I got my degree at the end of 2019.
And following grad
she's a
school, where did
baby.
you go from there?
I was hired directly by BODE Technology.
And when was that?
That was in July of 2019.
Now, when you started in July 2019 with BODE Technology, what was your position at that time, and sort of what were your duties and responsibilities when you initially began work?
So I started as a technologist. So that's someone that will do all of the lab portion of the work in a laboratory. And I helped out with our humanitarian team, so helping identify human remains. From there, I also helped with our criminal cases as well.
And when you started your work there, what, if any, sort of training did you undergo in relation to your work at BODE?
So when you first start at BODE Technology, you actually go through a series of lectures and you have a series of readings to go through all of the science that you're going to learn and the background of all of the technologies you're going to use. From there, you will observe a qualified analyst or a qualified person in the lab, go through everything that you're going to be trained in. And from there, you'll get a series of sets. So there'll be mock samples that you will take through the lab and do all of the testing on that you're going to be trained in. And it starts out with having that qualified analyst there with you, and you're able to ask questions and troubleshoot as you go. From there, you'll get a second set that'll be no analyst with you, but you're still allowed to ask questions at that point. And then your final set is something that we call a competency set. So you take it through the lab and treat it just like you would any other case, and you're not allowed to ask questions, and then you're graded at the end. If you pass that test, you can go through a written exam and then a verbal exam. And then you take your results from your testing and you defend it in a mock court sample. If you pass all of those qualifications, you can become an analyst or become qualified in whatever lab technique you're being trained in.
Also, when she said that she graduated in 2019, and I was like, oh, she's a baby. I didn't think about the fact that she was talking about her master's, not her undergraduate. So there is that detail. I take that back. Maybe not so much of a baby. Anyhow, regardless, we can still respect her and her professional expertise, even if she is a baby.
As far as that sort of training process went, so how long was it from the time that you joined BODE Technology to the time that you started doing the work that you do now?
It's been a rolling process of all the different trainings that I've had to go through. I'd say it took me about 9 months from when I started to be qualified in everything that I do for mitochondrial DNA testing. And then for analysis training, I think it was another 6 months or so.
Now, as far as the lab at BODE Technology, is that an accredited lab?
Yes, it is.
And do you know from whom the lab receives its accreditation?
Yes, we receive a international accreditation from an association called ANAB, which is just a national standards organization. We're also accredited by the FBI at their quality standards as well.
If you could just keep your voice up, please.
Would you like me to repeat that?
No.
Okay.
Ms. Chart, as far as your lab being accredited, can you explain to the jury sort of what that means and sort of what the process is for a lab to be accredited?
Sure. So all of our testing, all of the things that we report are basically guidelined by an outside body. So everything we do is established and gone through before or as we go through the testing procedures. So we're able to make sure that everything that we do is standardized for the country, all the testing that we perform.
And the lab that you work at BODE Technology, is that accreditation up to grade at this point?
It is.
Now, with reference to your own work within the lab, is there sort of standards of procedure or protocols that you follow in conformity with that accreditation?
There are. We're under the same standards as all other DNA testing at BODE for mitochondrial DNA testing.
Now, with regard to your specific work, are you familiar with what's called a proficiency test?
Yes, I am.
Can you explain to the jury what that is and what your experience has been with proficiency testing as far as how often and what it consists of?
So a proficiency test is how we stay qualified in what we do in the laboratory. So we get an outside test that we treat just like a regular criminal case. We take it all the way through the laboratory and have it reviewed, report our findings, and then it's sent out and we're graded on that performance.
And with reference to yourself, what, if any, issues have you had with regard to proficiency testing over the course of your years of work with BODE technology?
I've had none.
Now, as far as, am I correct in that BODE technology, as far as the lab is concerned, essentially deals with being contracted for work from external vendors?
Yes,
By that, I mean as far as you get your work or samples that are submitted from outside of your lab, correct?
we do.
And what are some of the types of organizations that, as far as the casework that you deal with, like where does it typically come from? What type of agencies?
It can come from anywhere across the United States, and we also have international clients as well.
Now, if I could turn your attention to a specific case that you worked on. When items come into BODE technology, as far as the lab, they go through sort of a check-in process and a chain of custody process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And with that, is there sort of a number or something that's assigned to a specific sample that follows it throughout the time that it's at your lab?
Yes, we'll call that the evidence item number, or E dash whatever number it's assigned.
Is there also a case number that's assigned as far as different cases or different case submissions?
Yes, there is.
And turn your attention to a specific case that was submitted in January, or partially submitted in January, and then partially submitted in March of 2024. That came from the Norfolk District Attorney's Office. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
And the BODE case number on that was CCA 2416-0023. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, with reference to your work on this specific case number, what were the items that you received, and sort of what were the items that you received that you eventually did some testing or analysis on?
So I continued testing for one of the hair samples.
And specifically, again, that's given a specific name as far as in the hair sample in this case was EO1. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then as far as for comparison purposes, what, if anything, did you receive in regard to comparison if you were able to generate a profile from EO1?
We received a reference profile from the victim, John O'Keefe.
Now, your specialty within the lab is in mitochondrial DNA testing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could you explain to the jury, as far as mitochondrial DNA, let me ask you this first. Are you also familiar with the term known as autosomal DNA?
I am, yes.
If you could, Ms. Chart, explain to the jury first what autosomal DNA is, and then what mitochondrial DNA is, and then I'll have another question.
Of course. So what many people are familiar with is what we call autosomal DNA. So that's the DNA that's actually stored in the nucleus of your cell. You get half from your mother and half from your father, and it's what makes you unique. And it's what people call the blueprint of a person. But what might be a new concept is that there's actually a second form of DNA that is stored within the mitochondria of a DNA of a cell. So if you can remember maybe back to any science classes that you had, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of that cell. And because of that, you can have upwards of hundreds to thousands of mitochondria within just one single cell. And within each of those mitochondria, you may have thousands of copies of that mitochondrial DNA. So in cases just like this one, where there may not be enough nuclear or autosomal DNA to find, you can go back and try to test for that mitochondrial DNA.
She said the thing, as you guys said. She said the mitochondria is a powerhouse of the cell. This is what everybody knows about the mitochondria. So like this is something that like we can all no, Mark Smith, she's not talking about Jedi, she's not talking about metachlorians. So she, this is the thing that we can that we can all identify about the powerhouse of the cell, right? About the mitochondria, is that it's the powerhouse of the cell. This is what we all know from high school biology, whatever level you took biology at. That's so funny. And I will say, even aside from that, this was probably one of the clearest explanations that any expert has been able to give us. Um, that any expert has been able to give us as to some of this more technical kind of stuff. I already like her more than most expert witnesses because of her ability to explain this highly technical stuff in a way that we can actually understand it.
And so if you could explain to the jury some, I think you've alluded to it already, but sort of the difference between autosomal DNA versus mitochondrial.
So mitochondrial DNA, in contrast, is inherited directly from your mother. So you will have the same mitochondrial DNA profile as your mother, and then you will also have the same mitochondrial DNA profile as any of your siblings. And it has that maternal inheritance that we call it, that makes it actually a great source for helping identify people, but it can also be used for criminal cases as well.
First, with respect to the autosomal DNA, can you explain to the jury sort of the process as far as just in general terms? What is the process as far as the testing goes or generation of protein?
Sure. So we share.
Also, that's not an earthquake. That's the cat rubbing himself on the tripod. Hey, Fitzy, come here. Get out of there. I was like really worried that he was actually going to knock it over. Okay, now he's walked away. So yeah, I am in California, but that was not an earthquake. That was the cat. He's just getting very excited about putting his smell on everything, apparently.
Similar processing methods.
Go back.
Goes or generation of protein.
Sure. So we share similar processing methods. So we will start out by taking a small portion of whatever is sent to the lab, and we'll call that sampling. We'll take notes on that and how much that we take forward through testing, and that will go into a small tube. From there, we will extract the DNA or take apart all of the cells by adding chemicals. And what we're left with is what we call a DNA extract. So that's actually where I came in this case. From there, the difference is we will go through what is still called amplification using the PCR method. That will make a bunch of copies of that DNA to be used later on. But for mitochondrial DNA, what we're targeting is specifically just the mitochondrial DNA in that extract. From there, we actually go to something that is completely different from autosomal testing, which is DNA sequencing. So DNA sequencing is really just a way that we're able to take those small strands of DNA that we've amplified, and we're able to read them almost like letters in a sentence.
And the PCR is in reference to the autosomal DNA, is that correct?
It's for both methods.
What does PCR stand for?
It's a polymerase chain reaction.
And when you say as far as the sort of quantification, I'm sorry, is it quantification or quantitation?
Quantification works.
As far as the quantification step is concerned, how is that sort of physically done? What kind of instrumentality are you using to accomplish that?
So for mitochondrial DNA, we will actually run the DNA after amplification on a gel, so a long, really what it sounds like, slab of gel, where we're able to visualize if we obtained any mitochondrial DNA as a band that shows up under a camera.
So with reference to this sample, this EO1, the hair sample, you received it at what stage again, or what step?
I received it as a DNA extract, so it was a amount of liquid in a tube at that point.
And as far as, in general terms, again, if you could explain to the jury, so what are the steps that go into the processing or analysis prior to that step where you received it on the quantification? So
it went through sampling, it was received, it was inventoried by the person that opened up the evidence, and a small portion or the hair was put into a tube, and then it went through that DNA extraction. So the hair was dissolved, and all of the DNA inside of that hair was released and isolated to just be then that DNA extract.
So from that point where you pick up as sort of the extract, what is it that you're doing with that as far as your analysis goes from there, and what type of instrumentality are you using to perform that analysis?
So from there, I am targeting and just trying to find if there is any mitochondrial DNA in that sample. So we'll use the PCR method to amplify to see if there is any mitochondrial DNA we can target. And then I will take it through and visualize it on that gel to make sure to see if we got anything. That is our quantification step. And then after that, I will take it through our sequencing step. And we do load that on an instrument called the 3130 genetic analyzer.
And the 3130 genetic analyzer, how does that work?
So it actually runs and separates each of the fragments of DNA that we have amplified and visualizes it through a program. So we're able to read each letter of your DNA sequence.
To take you back just a step, are you familiar with a term within your field called a D-loop?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury what a D-loop is and how that factors into your analysis of testing for mitochondria?
So the D-loop is actually the region of the mitochondrial genome that we target. It is targeted because it does not contain any useful areas for the actual function of a mitochondria. So it can change over time, and those changes are what actually are recorded as your mitochondrial DNA profile.
Now, as far as the D-loop, what, if any, relationship does that have with respect to certain variables within the human population?
Would you be able to word that?
Very poorly. Let me rephrase. The D-loop, as far as the region is concerned, what, if anything, does that have to do with certain variabilities within the human population?
Oh, yes. So because there is this variability in that region, it can change over time. And from that, there are different mitochondrial DNA profiles that are developed across the world.
Now, in addition to the extract from the hair sample E01, what, if any, other items did you receive in regard to comparison?
So we also received that reference sample from the victim, and that was taken forward for mitochondrial DNA testing as well.
And just for clarity purposes, when you say reference sample from the victim, you're referring to John O'Keefe, is that correct?
Yes.
And the reference sample that you received in regard to John O'Keefe, was that already an extract as well, or what, if anything, did you have to do with that in order to obtain a mitochondrial DNA profile?
So that sample was received, if I can refer to my notes. I did not. So I was not the person to actually do the sampling for this sample. It was received as a small cutting of a swab.
And so, as far as the small cutting from the swab, what is sort of, as far as creating a profile from that, creating a profile from the extract from the hair sample as well, was there any difference in that, sort of how those two mitochondrial DNA profiles were created?
No, they were tested the same way.
And basically, well, let me ask this. As far as with regard to the hair sample E01, were you able to obtain a mitochondrial DNA profile for the hair?
We were.
And with respect to Mr. O'Keefe's sample, were you also able to obtain a mitochondrial DNA profile from Mr. O'Keefe's sample?
Yes, we were.
Now, as far as for comparison purposes, what, if anything, did you look at, and what, if any, comparison or opinions or conclusions did you draw from that comparative analysis?
Sure, I can state directly from my report if that's all right.
Okay.
So the mitochondrial DNA profile that was obtained from the sample, the hair sample, was consistent with the mitochondrial DNA profile obtained from John O'Keefe. So therefore, John O'Keefe cannot be excluded as a possible contributor of that hair.
Now, Ms. Chart, are you also familiar with something called an MPOP, and for the record, that's EMPOP?
I am.
Can you explain to the jury what that is and how that's used as far as any sort of statistical analysis in reference to comparative comparison?
So it's a international populations database that houses different mitochondrial DNA profiles.
And how is it sort of used within your field, and how did you use it in this specific instance in relation to the consistency opinion between the hair sample and Mr. O'Keefe's?
So we were able to upload the profile from the hair and see if it was found at all within the population database. We test populations that are popular within the United States to narrow it down. And within the African American, US Caucasian, and US Hispanic databases that they have, it was not seen.
And what, if any, conclusions or opinions are you then able to formulate with reference to the consistency of the hair sample versus Mr. O'Keefe's sample with relation to that MPOP data?
Sure. So by not seeing it in the database, this means that we're able to exclude at least 99.895% of the population from being a source of that evidence.
And is there a certain level or percentage of confidence statistically that comes along with that exclusion of 99.895% of the U.S. population?
Yes, we use what is called the 95% confidence interval. It's actually a rule that is used for making statistical statements about populations. It's because there are always outliers that we don't include. We take the 95% majority of a population when we run those statistics.
And so, again, as far as your opinion or conclusions based on the comparison, is that the mitochondrial DNA profile from the hair sample was consistent with the mitochondrial DNA profile from Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
And that's with a 95% confidence, is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's the exclusion of at least 99.895% of the population of the United States, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, ma'am.
I would like to know, I'm a little bit confused about that last part where she compared it to Caucasian, African American, all these other populations, and it was excluded. It wasn't found in any of those. So if that's the case, wouldn't that also exclude John O'Keefe? I mean, although the term Caucasian is not exactly accurate because Caucasian refers to like the Caucasus region. That's a very particular part of the world, which doesn't necessarily mean what Americans typically mean when they say Caucasian. That refers to like of European origin. And also the definition of a lot of these things can also be very, very tricky because, what about when people have mixed backgrounds, mixed families, things like that? My head is a little bit expanded with some questions right now about that particular portion of this. I would like to see some clarification from them so we can actually understand and see if this is something that we can even rely on.
We have no questions, Your Honor.
All right.
Well, there goes that.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your next witness, Mr. Lally?
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth call Mr. Andre Porto to the stand.
Andre Porto? Okay, let's see. So the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab.
Wait this way. Watch your step. Please stand and face the court.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case down here and true the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. You can take this here.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
First, let me just say that, just for clarification, that microphone in front of you is adjustable. You can move it up and
Okay,
down.
cool.
any which way. Good afternoon, sir. Could you please state your name and spell your last name?
Yeah, my name is Andre Porto, last name spelled Porto.
And what do you do for work, sir?
I'm a forensic scientist too at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in the DNA unit.
And sir, if I could ask you just a few questions about your educational background, starting with your undergraduate work. Where did you go to school and what, if any, degrees did you receive from that?
I received a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And then,
And where did you go from there?
I went to the Boston University School of Medicine and I got a Master of Science in Biomedical Forensic Sciences.
And about what year was that? Did you receive that master's?
I graduated 2019.
And then following receipt of your master's, where did you go from there?
I went to the DNA unit in the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab.
And when you joined the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab initially, what was your title and sort of what was your duties and responsibilities with relation to that?
So I joined as a forensic scientist 1, and that's a training position where I underwent a training program that consisted of a bibliography with multiple journal articles and textbooks, as well as conducting the lab processing on training samples.
And that sort of initial work that you did as referred to as an FS1, is that correct?
Yes.
And that initial work that you did as an FS1, how long did you do that before you became a forensic scientist 2?
Approximately, the training itself was approximately 6 to 8 months. And then within a year, I was promoted to an FS2.
And when you were promoted to work as an FS2, what, if any, specific unit were you assigned to within the lab?
The DNA unit.
And have you essentially been with the DNA unit since that assignment initially occurred?
Yes.
Now, just a few questions about the lab at the State Police Crime Laboratory. Is that lab accredited by anybody?
Yes, we are accredited by ANAB, and that stands for ANSI, National Accreditation Board, and the ANSI stands for American National Standards Institute.
And with reference to that accreditation, can you describe to the jury just a little bit about generally in terms of what goes into an accreditation of a lab from ANAB?
Yeah, so this organization, ANAB, they came into our lab and they reviewed all of our protocols, ranging from facility security to the protocols that we do in the lab to staff education and training, and to make sure that we were meeting all the standards that we are being accredited to.
And the lab,
Also, I just realized there were some questions and comments and things from the last witness. Let me get those really quick before we continue on with his testimony. Jonathan Willig, question: why was Buchanan's exclusion number so much higher than Proctor's? Also, 3 different DNAs mixed in one sample, and it's still admissible. So I think that what it was is that they were testing to see if any of those 3 were present in the sample. So not to say that they mixed DNA from the 3 of them with the sample, but it was notable. It was interesting that Trooper Proctor was like less strongly excluded than Trooper Buchanan's, but they both still were like the signs pointed towards excluding them. But hey, one more strongly than the other. Mackenzie Robite, Legalbytes, how many witnesses does the prosecution have? Prosecution has listed, I don't have the number right here, but it's I think it's somewhere around 75 or 80, 85, right around there. And we are now on number 62 here. Jonathan Willig, question: doesn't Proctor testifying in cross that the chain of custody for almost all of his items of evidence not exist make the DNA evidence taken from that evidence inadmissible? It doesn't make it inadmissible, but it does certainly present some questions for the jury to determine and in looking at how they should weigh this evidence. So that's something that goes to the weight, not admissibility. Matt Gata, Legalbytes, do you think DNA should be done blind without the suspect samples by different labs? No, you need something to compare it to. So sampling for comparison purposes is fine, because you need something. It's got to either match or not match to something. Life on Makeup, question: even if the defense doesn't do a cross of these witnesses, can they still illustrate the lack of value their testimony has in incriminating KR in their closing arguments? Absolutely. Absolutely, because this is still evidence that came out in front of the jury. They can use anything that came out on direct or on cross for any of these witnesses. So long as it actually came out and is on the record, the jury has seen the evidence, has heard their testimony. It is all fair game to be used at closing arguments. Catastrophe Kate. Legalbytes, it excludes everyone but his mother's bloodline. So it also could have come from any siblings, his mother, any of her siblings, her mother. That's interesting too. So if they've also spent a lot of time around Karen Reed with her car or something like that, that's also possible. L. Boyd, Legalbytes, they compared JOK's DNA to known samples in the database. They exclude certain DNA profiles from places like Myanmar DNA samples. 95% confidence interval is called statistically correlated. They are saying they are very, very sure his DNA wasn't in the database. Okay. Well, I think I understood that. Okay, let's continue with the testimony.
at MSBCL, its accreditation, is it up to date at this point?
Yes.
With reference to yourself personally, sir, in regard to your casework, in regard to your training, are you familiar with the term proficiency testing?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is and sort of how often and what consists of the proficiency testing that you run?
Yeah, so a proficiency test is given on a semi-annual basis, so twice a year, by an outside agency, and we don't know what the results are, and we treat it as a regular case. So we take it through the regular DNA processing, and we have to pass that proficiency test to show that we maintain our competency in whatever work that we are doing in casework.
And sir, as far as the proficiency testing that you've undergone, what have been the results of your proficiency testing?
I've passed all of mine.
Now, sir, maybe a term that's pretty well understood, but if you could explain to the jury, at least based on your training experience, what your understanding is of a couple of different terms. And first one, I'm going to start with DNA itself. What is DNA?
Yeah, so DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and that is basically the genetic blueprint that makes us who we are. And we each have 2 copies of it. We inherited one from our mom and one from our dad, and that combination makes us unique. And with the exception of identical twins, everybody has a different DNA.
And is DNA the same in every cell of a person's body?
Yes, barring any rare mutations, DNA is the same. So if you take a blood sample and a saliva sample from the same person, the DNA should be the same.
And what I'm going to ask you now is just a little bit about the process of DNA and how it's tested within your lab. Am I correct in saying that there's essentially 4 steps? Is that correct?
Correct.
And approaching sort of chronologically, one of the steps is called extraction, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury how it is specifically that DNA is extracted by yourself in general terms when you're testing it?
Yes. So for the extraction step, so I receive the samples. They're in like small tubes. They're closed. I will add a set of reagents to it, apply heat to that sample, and that will actually burst open the cells to make the DNA available for use.
When you are extracting from a sample, do you know, or is there a way to sort of measure how much DNA you're extracting from a sample?
Yes.
And can you explain sort of how it is that you know that?
Yeah, so that's the second step that we call quantitation. And we take a small portion of that DNA that we extracted, and we'll apply a different set of reagents and run it through an instrument that heats and cools down the sample, goes through a cycle, and allows us to estimate how much DNA is extracted.
And also really quick here, Heather Miller, thank you so much for the super chat. Unfortunately, even if they proved it was his hair, none of this is going to change someone's mind who believes that hair was planted. This is a waste of time and resources, IMO. I mean, that's the other thing, is that may be one of the reasons why the defense is so confident about this, is because of the fact that well, first off, they may be looking at the jury and looking to see if they are actually paying attention to this. If they're not, then that's a sign of maybe they don't need to cross-examine if they are not paying attention, because then they're not getting any of the information involved there. The other thing is that the topic of whether or not they planted it is also another question. How convincing has the defense been in that for the jury? I don't know. It's almost impossible to know. Or alternatively, even if it wasn't planted there and it actually is John O'Keefe's hair and it was there beforehand, how do we know that that was there as a result of this instance, or just him living and being around that car because of the fact that, he's been dating the defendant for how many years? They've been in a relationship. There are a number of ways that the defense can really kind of come at this particular area of the prosecution's case in chief. And the fact that they're not cross-examining also just speaks to confidence or cockiness. I don't know. Your interpretation may vary.
So what is PCR?
PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction, and it's basically known as molecular Xeroxing, where it's making millions of copies of specific areas that you can target of the DNA.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step over.
Sorry.
Is that essentially the third step that you want to go?
Correct.
Now, what is a SDR?
It stands for short tandem repeat, and these are locations in the DNA that change each person. So it's comprised of small little repeats, and each person, however repeats you have at that location, is sort of what will show up in your DNA profile.
Now, how is it with your work in the lab that you identify DNA fragments?
It's the fourth step, where we call detection, where after we amplified the specific areas that we are looking at in the DNA, we'll run it through an instrument that will separate them out and generate the DNA profile.
Now, within your work in the lab, are you familiar with terminology as far as a known item versus a question item?
Yes.
And can you explain what each of those mean in reference to your field and your work, and sort of what is the difference between the two?
Yes. So a known item is an item that's collected directly from an individual and is to be used for comparison purposes, whereas a questioned item is collected from, let's say, like a crime scene where we don't know the source.
Now, as far as your lab or your unit within the lab, the DNA unit itself, does it follow sort of standardized policies and protocols?
Yes, we do.
And who approves of those particular policies and protocols and procedures?
Our technical leader.
Now, could you...
And also, Charming Gatlin, thank you so much for the super chat. Can we get DNA testing for Gorilla Glue on the Lexus? That's the only way I am buying that hair follicle. Stayed put while being towed from Dighton to Canton in a blizzard. There are plenty of other people who are right there with you. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't heard anything about any testing for Gorilla Glue, but the witness who said that she collected that piece of evidence said that it had no resistance to it. In other words, it was just kind of sitting there. So make of that what you will, for sure.
Explain the process used to analyze the evidence in this case.
Yeah. So the evidence in this case underwent that four-step process I just described, and which was extraction to quantitation to amplification, detection, and then interpretation of the profile that was generated.
Now, what are some of the controls, or what do you use when you're during the course of your test?
Yeah, so there are two types of controls, positive and negative controls. So a positive control is a sample with a known DNA profile that we use to show that each step in the process worked as expected. And a negative control is a sample that has no DNA in it and only receives the reagents that we are using. And that is to show that there's no inherent contamination of the reagents that we used.
Let me ask you, sir, if you know, what are some of the ways to prevent sort of DNA transfer from yourself or from someone else working on the case or from other samples that you may be working on with others?
Yeah, so there are many ways. One way is to clean the workspace before we start working and after, just to make sure that it's constantly being cleaned. Another way is to wear lab PPE, so personal protective equipment like lab coats, face masks, and hairnets. And another one is to make sure that we only have one tube open at a time so that we don't have any cross-contamination between samples.
Now, your work specifically, sir, does it undergo some sort of review process?
It does.
And specifically your work in this case, did it undergo that same sort of general review process pursuant to the policies and procedures you're speaking about before?
Yes, it did.
Now, when a case comes into the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, it's assigned a specific case number, correct?
Correct.
And in this instance, I'm referring to a case number entitled 22-02184. Familiar with that case?
I am.
And you did tested a number of different items within that case, correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as the items are concerned, similar to how the items from a specific investigation or case are assigned case number, are those different items assigned different item numbers as well?
Yes, they are.
And if there is something that is taken, swabbed, or cut, or something from a specific item, how is that labeled in relation to the item that it was taken from?
So basically, let's say we have a parent item that's number 2-1. And then if we take a cutting of that item, it would be called, if it's the first cutting, it would be called 2-1.1.
Now, in this case, sir, was a known standard process?
Yes, it was.
And can you explain to the jury sort of how that process occurs in regard to process of a known standard?
Yeah, so the lab processing is the same, where it undergoes the same 4-step process. And a qualified analyst then looked at the DNA profile that was generated to make sure that it was a single source profile, meaning at each location that we looked at, there were only 1 or 2 peaks. And after that, it underwent the technical and administrative review process before it was closed out and ready for use for comparison.
Do you know whose known DNA standard was processed in this case?
Yes.
And who was it?
Known blood standard from John O'Keefe.
Now, as far as your involvement in this case, what was your involvement?
I performed the testing of the questioned items.
And did you have occasion to perform DNA analysis on certain items submitted to your lab in connection with this case?
Yes, I did.
And let me ask you about some specific items. Were you asked to perform some analysis on a item labeled 3-1.1?
Yes, I was.
And if you know, what was that sample from?
Would I be able to refer to my notes? Thank you. So that was a sample from passenger side tail light.
And with respect to that, there was a sample that was, or DNA profile that was generated from that swab from the tail light, correct?
Correct.
And what, if anything, were the findings or what kind of, what was the conclusion of the analysis of the profile from the swab taken from the tail light of the vehicle?
The DNA profile was interpreted as a 3-person mixture, including male DNA.
And to be more specific, when an item comes in, it's assigned an item number. There's also a description that's provided along with sort of where the item came from.
Correct.
And so specifically, item 3-1.1 is a sample from passenger side tail light, and it gives a specific Massachusetts registration plate of 3GC684, correct?
Correct.
And so from the analysis of the swab or profile that was obtained from the swab from the tail light, what, if anything, was that compared to?
John O'Keefe, standard.
For the sample from Mr. O'Keefe?
Correct.
And with regard to that, is that a comparative analysis that you conducted yourself?
Yes.
And what, if any, opinions or conclusions come from as far as the comparative analysis between the swab from the tail light from that vehicle and the profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
Yeah. The DNA profile from this item is at least 510 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
Yeah, now, sir, with reference to that item, that comparative analysis, you said 510 non-alien times, is that correct?
Correct.
And non-alien, just for clarification purposes, do you know how many zeros that is?
It's a 1 followed by 27 zeros.
And with regard to that item coming from, or the profile containing the comparative analysis consistent with the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe, there are also 2 unknown contributors, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, with regard to that, are you familiar with that item or the profile from that item being submitted along with some other samples to an outside vendor called BODE Technology?
Correct.
Now, with reference to another item contained within that, are you familiar with an item 3-6?
Yes.
And what is item 3-6?
That is the root end of hair from exterior passenger side rear panel.
Now, sir, as far as hair is concerned, try for the jury a little bit about sort of DNA and how that works between Well, let me ask you this. There's essentially, when it comes to a hair sample, there's typically going to be a root end and a shaft end, correct?
Correct.
And where from the DNA, as your lab is concerned, where is that? Where are you able to sort of test from, or where would you be looking to extract a sample from in order to perform testing?
Yes. So our testing for hairs, the DNA will be coming from any tissue that might be attached to the root end of the hair.
And so you're looking for specifically sort of follicular tissue, is that correct?
Tissues attached to the hair, yes.
Now, as far as you familiar with the terms sort of autosomal DNA versus mitochondrial DNA?
Yes, I am.
And can you explain for the jury briefly just sort of what your understanding is of each of those two terms and what, if any, differences there are between the two?
Yeah, so autosomal DNA is present in the nucleus of the cell. That is, we inherited that from one copy from our dad, one copy from our mom. As mitochondrial DNA is present within the mitochondria, and that is inherited via the mother.
Now, your lab at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory, is the lab equipped, or does your lab do mitochondrial DNA testing?
We're not equipped to do mitochondrial testing.
And so when you say that the lab is not equipped to do the testing, what exactly does that mean?
So we don't have the instruments or the facilities to do that testing, and we don't get that testing requested very often. So it makes more sense to send it out to an approved vendor to do that testing.
And one of those approved vendors would be the BODE Technology Lab in Lorton, Virginia, that you were discussing previously.
Correct.
And as far as your understanding is that BODE Technology is equipped and does do mitochondrial DNA testing, correct?
Correct.
Really quick, Gunnar 1950, thanks so much for the super chat. Haven't we been here before? Yeah, I feel like we were just here. This is, I guess, interesting that we're going over the same stuff again, just with a different witness.
Now, with respect to your testing, you did some testing with regard to item 3-6 of the hair, is that correct?
Correct.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what that testing was and what, if any, opinions or conclusions you were able to draw from the testing that you were able to do in the lab?
Yeah, so that testing began the same way as the 4-step process. I extracted the hair and then went to quantitation. After quantitation, I determined that there was no human DNA detected. So then testing was halted at that step.
And so what, if anything, was the results of that testing that you conducted with regard to that?
That no human DNA was detected, so STR analysis was not performed.
Now, that phraseology there, as far as no human DNA detected, what does that mean?
So quantitation is looking specifically for human DNA, and we couldn't detect that with our instruments. It's not speaking to the hair itself. It's just that we could not detect any human DNA.
That's not so much to say that there is no DNA on the hair, it's just that it is below the level of detection that you're qualified to report. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Now, with regard to the tail example, if I could step back to that for a second, the 510 non-alien times, what, if any, relationship does that have to sort of the overall world human population?
So the world population, I think, currently is about 8 billion, which is an 8 followed by 9 zeros. And 510 non-alien has 30 zeros in it. So it's larger.
Significantly more. Correct?
Significantly larger, sorry, yes.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to some other items that you tested in relation to this case. And just to be clear, sir, you conducted or issued about 6 different DNA reports in regard to the testing that you conducted in this case. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if I could direct your attention now to the 6th report of DNA testing report number 6, that involved an item called 3-3.1. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what is the description of that item?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Got the wrong report. That is a sample from apparent glass on rear bumper.
With the same mass registration plate as the tail light, is that correct?
Correct.
And what, if any, conclusions or opinions were you able to draw from your analysis of testing on that particular item?
So at the quantitation step for this item, insufficient human DNA was detected and STR analysis was not performed.
And again, just as far as that statement is concerned, can you explain a little bit to the jury what that means as far as what's your opinions or what you're seeing, if anything, or your findings in relation to comparative analysis between that and...
No. Oh my goodness. We had to go back because we were not live and now it just forced us to live. Okay. All right.
Followed by 9.
So we can go a little bit past
Issued
this.
your attention now to the 6th report of DNA testing report number 6.
Okay.
That involved an item called 3-3.1. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what is the description of that item?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Got the wrong report. That is a sample from apparent glass on rear bumper.
And with the same mass registration plate as the tail light, is that correct?
Correct.
And what, if any, conclusions or opinions were you able to draw from your analysis of the testing on that particular item?
So at the quantitation step for this item, insufficient human DNA was detected and STR analysis was not performed.
And again, just as far as that statement is concerned, can you explain a little bit to the jury what that means as far as what your opinions or what you're seeing in regard to insufficient human DNA detected and STR analysis not performed?
Yes, so we do at the quantitation step, we do have a cutoff, a certain value where if we detect the human DNA that's below this cutoff, we validated that it's not going to, most likely not going to provide a profile that can be used. So we halt testing at that step.
Sir, if I could direct your attention to the 5th report that you issued in this case, DNA testing report number 5. And does that sort of contain the totality of the items that you analyzed in this particular case?
It does.
Now, sir, if I could direct your attention to an item labeled as number 3-2.1.1. And what is the description for that particular item, sir?
That is a sample from exterior of broken drinking glass.
And with reference, were you able to generate a DNA profile from the swab with the sampling from that item?
Yes.
And what, if any, comparison were you able to do in regard to the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, so the sample was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, and the DNA profile for this item is at least 530 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
And so the sample from the exterior of the broken drinking glass is at least 530 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
Now, if I could turn your attention to item 7-1.2.1. And what is the description associated with that item?
That is a sample from stain A on upper right leg of jeans.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile from the sample from what's labeled as stain A on the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's jeans?
I was.
And what, if any, comparison were you able to do with relation to that profile from that sample to Mr. O'Keefe's DNA profile?
Yeah, so the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA. Contributor 1 was suitable for comparison, and due to limited information, contributors 2 and 3 were not suitable for comparisons. And the DNA profile from this item is at least 570 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown individuals. And this provides support for an inclusion.
And so when you say, as far as due to limited information, contributors 2 and 3 are not suitable for comparison, what does that mean?
So that just means that those contributors were very low and that any comparisons that would be done to them could not be reliable based on our protocols and validations.
So from your comparative analysis, you came to the opinion or conclusion that the sample from the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's jeans was 570 non-alien times more likely than it originated from Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Could you rephrase that?
With respect to your comparative analysis of the profile from the sample from stain A on the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's jeans, your opinion is that it was at least 570 non-alien times more likely that it originated from John O'Keefe, correct?
From then,
System.
What was your conclusion as it came to item 7-1.2.1?
so the DNA profile from this item is at least 570 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
Sure. Let me break from this for a second, and I just want to ask you a little bit about transfer DNA. Are you familiar with that term?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what you understand that term means?
So transferred DNA just means DNA that sort of transfers based on just some activity that can happen. Like if somebody touches a water bottle, they might transfer some DNA onto that water bottle.
Now, from the fact that DNA is on something or on an item and it matches a profile from an individual, is there anything from that that you can opine or conclude as to how that DNA was deposited or when?
No, I cannot.
Now, with reference to factors that may cause a degradation of a DNA sample or a touch DNA sample that's left, what, if any, are some of the factors that may affect that as far as causing degradation of a sample or you're causing an inability for you to be able to generate a DNA profile from that?
Some factors include being exposed to heat for a prolonged time and ultraviolet rays from the sun, as well as just time. It might eventually lead to some degradation.
Now, as far as items that are outside, because you indicated that being hot or warm temperatures might have some effect on it. What, if any, impact will cold temperatures have?
So we store our DNA extracts in a cold room. So cold temperatures could be very good to help preserve any DNA that's on there.
Now, if I could turn your attention back to your report number 5 and ask you with reference to item 7-1.3.1. And can you, what is the description for that item, sir?
That is a sample from stain B on upper right leg of jeans.
And again, those would be the genes of Mr. O'Keefe, is that right?
Correct.
And you were able to generate a DNA profile from that sample as well?
Correct.
And what, if any, comparison were you able to do between the profile from that DNA on the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's genes and Mr. O'Keefe's DNA?
Yeah, so the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA. And the DNA profile from this item is at least 660 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals. And this provides support for an inclusion.
Next, I'd like to turn your attention to item 7-1.4.1. And what is that sample, or what is that item or sample from?
That is a sample from stain C on upper right leg of genes.
And those genes would be Mr. O'Keefe's genes as well?
Correct.
And were you able to then generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
And what, if any, comparison, or what, if any, conclusions or opinions did you draw from a comparative analysis of the DNA profile from that sample from the upper right leg of Mr. O'Keefe's genes and Mr. O'Keefe's DNA profile?
So the DNA profile is a mixture of at least 2 contributors, including male DNA. Contributor 1 is suitable for comparison, and due to limited information, contributor 2 is not suitable for comparison. The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors, and the DNA profile of this item is at least 830 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and an unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to item 7-1.5.1, and what is where did that come from?
That is sample from stain D on upper right leg of genes.
And again, were you able to generate a DNA profile for that sample?
Yes.
And what, if anything, were your findings in relation to comparative analysis between that and that DNA profile from that sample and the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA, and the DNA profile from this item is at least 670 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
So in other words, all of the blood stains on his genes are in fact his own blood. So somebody made him bleed his own blood. In other words, is we can confirm that. Sheena Ford. Did Fitzy get so bored he left? Yeah, he's over on the other side of the room snoozing now. He decided he's done with this.
If I could turn your attention to item 7-1.6.1. And what is the description for that item?
That is sample from stain E on upper right leg of genes.
And were you able to also generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
And did you then conduct a comparative analysis between the DNA profile from that sample and the DNA profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
And what, if any, conclusions or opinions or findings did you have in regard to that comparative analysis?
Yeah, so the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors, including male DNA. Contributor 1 is suitable for comparison, and due to limited information, contributor 2 is not suitable for comparison. The DNA profile from this item is at least 1 decillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and an unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unknown, unrelated individuals, and this provides support for an inclusion.
Now, as far as that decillion, again, similar to the non-alien, how many zeros are we talking about?
That's a 1 followed by 33 zeros.
Now, if I could turn your attention to item 7-1.7.1. You familiar with that item, sir?
Yes.
And what is the description for that item?
That is sample from unstained areas of exterior of genes.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
And similarly, were you able to then do a comparative analysis between the DNA profile from that sample and the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
And what, if anything, were your findings in regard to that comparative analysis?
Yep. The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 4 contributors, including male DNA. The DNA profile from this item is at least 553 septillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 3 unknown individuals than if it originated from 4 unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
And similarly, sir, with regard to that number septillion, how many zeros is that?
That is a 1 followed by 24 zeros.
I'm going to ask some questions about a number of different items from 7-17. These are samples taken from an orange T-shirt as well as a gray long sleeve shirt. Is that correct?
Also, Gunnar 1950. Does JO have 3 different DNAs? No. So what they are saying is that it's much more likely, way more likely, to be John O'Keefe's blood and 2 other individuals, 2 other unnamed individuals, over being 3 completely unknown individuals. So in other words, I don't understand that aspect of it where there's always 2 other individuals that they're talking about, but I don't think that that's an indication that this is also a mix of someone else's DNA. So yeah, but that's up to the prosecution to clarify that for the jury. The jury might be thinking, okay, so you're telling me that it's John O'Keefe's DNA and 2 other people, and you guys swabbed for 2 other people. Maybe, maybe that's why the defense doesn't want to cross-examine, is because they don't want to clarify that ambiguity actually kind of helps the defense. Could be.
Correct. And if you could, essentially you did testing on those items as well as some fingernail clippings belonging to Mr. O'Keefe?
Correct.
Or samples from the fingernail clippings?
Yes.
Now, with regard to those items, swabbings taken from the stains from various areas of the orange T-shirt, and just in general, where were those areas on the T-shirts, the orange T-shirt to start with, that the swabbings were taken from?
The front left of orange shirt and front bottom right of the shirt as well, and just the back left shoulder of the orange shirt.
Now, with regard to the gray long sleeve shirt, where are the areas on the shirt where those swabbings were taken from?
The right sleeve, the center front, the back left, the back right, and the back bottom of right.
And were you able to generate DNA profiles from each of those items?
I was.
And were you then able to do a comparative analysis between the DNA profile from each of those items with relation to the DNA profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
I was.
And what, if any, conclusions were you able to draw from that comparative analysis?
So the male DNA profile was interpreted as originating from a single contributor, and the DNA profile from these items is at least 490 octillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe than if it originated from an unknown, unrelated individual. This provides support for an inclusion.
As far as that number is concerned, octillion, how many zeros is in an octillion?
That's a 1 followed by 27 zeros.
And with regard to each of those items, from the orange T-shirt, the gray long sleeve T-shirt, and the fingernail clippings, so they were taken from both the right and left hands of Mr. O'Keefe, is that correct?
Correct.
So that's 490 followed by 27 zeros. That would be from a single contributor, correct?
Correct.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to item 7-18, I'm sorry, 7-18.4.1. You're familiar with that item?
Yes.
And what is the description associated with that item?
Sample from stain C on top front gray long sleeve shirt.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile with respect to that?
Yes.
And were you able to then do a comparative analysis between that DNA profile from that item and the DNA profile of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, I was.
And what, if any, conclusions did you come to with regard to that?
The male DNA profile was interpreted as originating from a single contributor. The DNA profile from this item is at least 58 octillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe than if it originated from an unknown, unrelated individual. This provides support for an inclusion.
And with regard to that, stain from the gray long sleeve T-shirt, again, that was determined by you through your testing to be DNA from a single contributor matched John O'Keefe, correct?
It was determined to be from a single contributor, yes.
Now, sir, if I could turn your attention to item 7-18.14.1, are you familiar with that item?
So I may need to correct what I said earlier, because this time he said it was a single contributor. So in other words, they had identified it was 3 contributors before, 4 contributors at one point. In other words, they found DNA that matched up to a number of other individuals, but the only one that they could identify, but it probably still rules out Trooper Buchanan and Trooper Proctor because they had samples to compare them to with all of this DNA testing. So it would have identified them as the 2 other people. So it would be 2 other individuals. Of course, there are other people that were, say, for example, at 34 Fairview Road who could have come into contact with him on that night that I don't believe that they did get any sort of swabs for. So the DNA on his jeans, DNA on his gray long sleeve sweatshirt, things like that. I don't know. Maybe that's DNA from other people that we know of, but we just don't know because we don't have their samples to compare it to. Fair point, guys. Thank you for helping me clarify that.
Yes.
And what is the description associated with that item, sir?
Sample from stain L on back bottom right of gray long sleeve shirt.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile from that sample from that item as well?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to then do a comparative analysis between the profile from that sample versus the profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, I was.
And what, if anything, were your findings in relation to that?
So the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors, including male DNA. The DNA profile from this item is at least 1 decillion times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and an unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
And sir, I'm going to ask you, or draw your attention to item 7-18.17.1. Familiar with that item?
Yes.
And what is the description associated with the sample from that item?
Sample from unstained areas of exterior of gray long sleeve shirt.
And were you able to also generate a DNA profile from that sample?
Yes.
And what, if any, were you able to then do a comparative analysis between the sample profile from that sample and the profile from Mr. O'Keefe?
I was.
And what, if any, conclusions did you come to with reference to that comparative analysis?
The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 2 contributors, including male DNA. Contributor 1 is suitable for comparison, and due to limited information, contributor 2 is not suitable for comparison. The DNA profile from this item is at least 960 non-million times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and an unknown individual than if it originated from 2 unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
Sir, there are some other items from which you conducted testing, but were not able to generate profile from, correct?
Correct.
And specifically, I'm going to ask about item 7-3.1. That's a sample from the right instep of Mr. O'Keefe's sneaker, is that correct?
Could you repeat that number again, please?
Sir, if I could direct your attention within your DNA report number 5, I'm talking about item number 9.
Yep.
And so, sir, with reference to that, what, if any, there's an indication as far as the mixture not being suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile, correct?
Correct. It was a mixture of at least 5 contributors.
And so from that, as far as not suitable for comparison, can you explain to the jury what that means?
Yes. So during our validations, we've only validated mixtures up to 4 contributors because we've determined that once you get more than 4, like at least 5 contributors into a mixture, it becomes too complex to be able to make any reliable comparisons to that mixture.
Sir, if I could direct you to item number 11 or item number 7-18.3.1 within your report.
Right. Yep.
And that's a stain from the gray long sleeve t-shirt top front, is that correct?
Yes.
Now that is indicated as not suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile, correct?
Correct.
And can you explain to the jury what that means as far as not being suitable due to the quality of the profile?
Yes. So during our bringing it back to our 3rd step of amplification, where we're making millions of copies of specific locations, sometimes there might not be a lot of DNA there, and that amplification set might not amplify all the information that could be present, and the profile that's generated won't have all the information to be able to reliably make a comparison. So the information that we are able to look at is very limited, so we just do not do any comparisons because they would not be reliable.
And was that same as far as not suitable for comparison due to the quality of the profile? Was that the same for 2 other areas that you tested in regard to the front or sample from the front of the gray long sleeve shirt and a sample from the back left sleeve of the gray long sleeve shirt?
Yes.
May I have a moment?
Yes.
Are we at the end of his direct?
So let me ask you just briefly, are you familiar with the term called SDR mix?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that is and how that is involved or how it's implicated within your testing?
Yeah, so StarMix is a tool that we use to basically break down complex mixtures into its individual contributors and into like a way that it will best describe that mixture. And once it does that, it'll then do comparisons and calculate a likelihood ratio, which is a statistical weight to that comparison.
And how does that relate to the testing that you did in this?
I used StarMix on all the samples that had comparisons done to them.
Thanks. Thanks. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ms. Little? No questions, thank you. All right, Mr. Porto, you are all set.
No cross.
you.
Could I see counsel regarding scheduling, please?
Yes.
All right, there was no cross-examination. Just going to see counsel real quick. So let's get some questions so that we can get caught up on those. Excuse me. Taya, Legalbytes, have they been recognized as expert witnesses? Do they need to? You know, typically anyone who is going to be commenting on DNA analysis is going to be an expert. My suspicion is that there are a number of witnesses here that have already been predetermined to be experts here, that they just aren't doing that in front of the jury. Sometimes some courts will do that to make things more efficient.
Mike, please.
So we're actually going to send you home today because we're on schedule. It's beautiful out. Rather than start with the witness that we'll start with tomorrow morning, it makes sense. I'm going to talk to the lawyers for a few minutes. So we'll send you home. Do not discuss this case with anyone. And just so that I'm clear, that means each other. That means any aspect of this case, any observations, anything at all. Do not do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it. We expect a full day tomorrow. So we'll see you tomorrow, okay?
All rise for the court, please.
Wow. Okay. So we are on schedule. Interesting. Are we going to see some sort of
Follow
conversation
me, please.
with the attorneys. Oops, sorry.
All right, so I'll see counsel at sidebar about a couple of issues.
Okay, couple of issues. Let's see. Can we just go straight to live? I think so. Okay, so they're still waiting for counsel. Let's answer some questions while we do. Back to Atea. So with expert witnesses, sometimes these experts they'll be designated either inside the courtroom in front of the jury, or they will be basically determined through like a motion in limine ahead of time, so that sort of makes things a bit more efficient. I've seen both happen in cases. So I don't know if that's what's going on here, or if none of these are actually expert witnesses. I really don't know. It would be nice to know, however. Jerry Roth, Legalbytes, is Alan Jackson trying to get Lally to the 1,500 mark of the Lally tally? Well, we actually hit past the 1,500 mark yesterday, maybe even on Monday. I think we are like rounding the bases to 2,000. So we are, yeah, and today was a lot of Lally too. So a lot of Lally direct, I should say. So I think that there's going to be a lot of what if any's today. Sue B, does the jury need to know that John's blood is John's blood? Apparently they do. Apparently they do. Jack Carter, thanks so much for the super chat. Sup LB, listening to your content helps keep my sanity while at work. Are you able to recommend any friends/channels that are covering YSL or upcoming DJT trials that you aren't covering? So I don't know anybody who is consistently covering either one of those trials. I do know that there have been some people that have put out some really great videos on the YSL trial. Natalie Lawyer Chick had a really good video on the attorney getting arrested. So she's a great one. I saw that Nate the Lawyer just put out a video on the whole thing also. I haven't seen the video itself, but I totally trust his work. He's got really great content on all kinds of stuff. So would highly recommend him as well. As far as other people who have put out content, I haven't seen anything else that's actually been put out on that. But oh, thanks, Mom. What was I going to say? Yes. So there's definitely check those two out for sure. And oh, thank you. Jeez. Okay. Thank you. Motions and lemonade. Okay. So yeah. So anyway, so those two are really great. Oh, Lawyer, also covered it. Okay. Thank you, Jillian. So yes. And I do know the lawyer has been released. There have been all kinds of updates on that one as well. Interesting stuff. Oh, Inside the Law channel. Okay. I'm not familiar with that one.
So I totally blew off the.
I know what it is. It's sponsorship. Okay. Looks like the judge is heading out, and that is it for the day. So a much earlier day today. Here's another question here from Sue B. Question: do police need to have DNA in the system? Seems like they would. They need to have something to compare it to, whether that is some sort of a database that already exists, or a swab that a swab or some kind of a sample that they can compare it to. So for sure they do need that. Otherwise it's just like you have nothing to reference it to. Aside from that, yeah, that's about it. Is Uncivil Law also, has he put out some videos on it? I assume so. So there's also a link to Uncivil Law in the chat as well from the mods. Okay. I think that's about it. Didn't mention it as much in the stream, but I did mention it earlier this morning. Thank you so much to all of you who are members of Bite Club, who have decided to join in. Really does help with sort of stabilizing the overall income from this channel, so that we can, coming out of a trial like this, during trials, there's a lot that happens. There's so much engagement, so much interest in all of the content and everything else. But the long-term kind of sustainability of channels like this really comes from memberships through YouTube memberships or through Patreon supporters and things like that. So I I really appreciate all of you folks who are supporting through that, deciding to support through, especially on a consistent basis. But any way that folks can support the channel is good and helpful and so appreciated. So thank you to those of you who have in fact joined Byte Club one way or another. Thank you to all of the folks who are super chatting and all of that kind of stuff as well. You guys have no idea how much it means to me. Also, I see I need to close the poll. Thank you so much for the reminder. Always something that is helpful to have a reminder. And also I know, yes, I do need to go to the post office as well. I've got to figure out the some sort of a PO address so that I can get stuff forwarded to me, so that folks can send stuff to me from there. Okay, this poll halfway through day 24. How do you lean regarding KR's murder charge? Not guilty, 88%. Need more information, 7%. Guilty, 4%. And this was 962 votes. So, still about the same. But anyway, like I was saying, thank you so much to everybody for supporting. And if you are not able to support right now, even just liking the stream helps so much because it pushes the content out there. Subscribing to the channel really helps. We are so close to 245,000 subscribers, which is amazing. Let's see here. What are we at? 244,759. So we're getting close to 245. Hopefully we can get to 250 by the end of this trial. I would love to see that. I would love to see 250K by the end of this trial. So if you guys want to join me on that journey, welcome. Thanks so much for being here with me for this whole thing. And yes, and as always, thank you so much to the mods for helping with all the stuff that you do in the chat. So thank you to everybody. And I guess that's it for day 24. We'll be putting out a recap before tomorrow morning. And then also tomorrow there's a full day of trial, but I will not be able to stream. So for folks who are looking for places to go, I don't know that Ian is going to be streaming. I'm sure Emily's going to be streaming, Emily D. Baker. I know Ian and Lawyer, are both doing like daily recaps that are streams like right afterwards. So there are some places to go and see it. So I apologize for not being able to stream it myself, but I will look forward to seeing you guys in the recaps. And then also next week, well, I'm sure we'll have a full week of trial unless Judge Canone says otherwise tomorrow. Who knows? You never quite know what we're going to get at the end of the week as to what the next week is going to look like. Oh, and also Andrea Burkhart, also fantastic option for streaming the trial as well. Okay, folks. I think that's about it. I will see you guys. See you in the recap. I'll see you in the next live stream. See ya.